Project import and export. Project data may be imported and exported to and from P6 in the following formats. First of all, XER, which is a format developed by the original developers of Primavera P6. Primavera P6 was developed by a company called Eagle Ray, and XER stands for Export Eagle Ray. This format is now being superseded by Primavera XML format. The XER files can be imported and exported using the Windows client but not the web client. Next, Microsoft Project MPP. Earlier versions of P6 could import an MPP file. You had to have Microsoft Project installed on your machine, and it had to be version 2003 or earlier. If you installed 2007, this disabled the MPP import and export. So you have to have Microsoft Project 2003 or earlier installed on your machine plus a version of P6. Project XML is now the current supported version of Microsoft Project file format that may be imported and exported into P6. So if somebody sends you a MPP file, you need to open it up in Microsoft Project and save it in Project XML file before you can import it into P6 under normal circumstances. MPX is an older file format that Microsoft Project used to use. It was developed in the 90s and was superseded with Project 2000 and Project XML format. The disadvantage of MPX is it strips multiple calendars off activities, but some people you'll find SureTrack used to save to an MPX file, and that was an easy way to get a Microsoft Project file into SureTrack. Primavera Project Planner and SureTrack files saved in P3 format can be imported. You have to have Primavera P3 loaded on the same machine as P6, but P3 can't be installed on Windows 7 or a 64-bit machine, so you have to load P3 onto a Windows XP environment, and a lot of people use either Windows Virtual Machine or VM Player running XP, and then they load P6, P3, SureTrack, and an earlier version of Excel so you can open up DBF files. I personally use Windows Virtual Machine. I find that quite a satisfactory solution, and it's free download from the Microsoft website, and you can create a Windows XP environment on a Windows 7 or 8 machine quite happily. The later version of Primavera import and export file is XML. 8.3 now supports multiple projects, so you can import and export multiple projects with an XML format into both P6 web and also the Windows client, whereas the XER cannot be imported into the Windows client. Also, Project XML can be imported into a Windows client as well. The final version we're going to discuss is the UNCFAT XML format, which is a format mandated by many US government agencies, and there's a slide on this in a minute. So let me go through how you can import and export project data with all of these formats. So first of all, let's have a look at exporting data. I select File, Export, and if I want to export as an XER file, which is the older Primavera format, Primavera P6 format, I can select what version. If I'm giving it to somebody version 7, I can click on version 7 if I want to. I'm going to export as 8.2. I select Next. I can select whether I want to export the project resources or roles. Obviously, I want all the project data. If you have multiple projects open, you can select which project to export, and I'm going to put it on the desktop. You can put it wherever you like, but I'm going to put it on the desktop and call it Demo XER Export, and finishing it now goes in export set. If I go to the desktop now, you can see that this is the file that I've just exported. It's an XER file, and I can right click and open it with something like Notepad, and you can see here that it's a tacky text file. Typically with text files, they're very easily edited, and you don't want to open up an XER file with something like Microsoft Word because it will destroy the format, but certainly Notepad or a text editor, WordPad or Excel are quite satisfactory for editing them. If you're in version 7 and somebody sends your file in 8.3, you can actually overwrite in the first line this with version 7.0, and you'll now be able to import it into version 7 of P6. You can see quite a lot of data is exported, like the currencies, and if you go down here, you'll recognize some information like the WBS, and if you go across here, you'll find that the activity names are here and that sort of thing. So this is the data format. It's a text file, and obviously if you want to edit it, you can do, but it's better that you don't probably, except changing the version. So that's creating an XER file. The next file format you can export in is File Export. If I want to give it to somebody with Primavera Contractor, there are two versions of Contractor. Primavera Contractor is a version of P6 being hobbled, and you can only open one project at a time, and it's missing all the enterprise functions, but it does have currencies, but it doesn't have roles and that sort of thing. So if you're giving this to somebody with Primavera Contractor, you select one of these, but it is an XCR file, exactly the same format, but so selecting 6.1 is effectively the same as selecting 6.1 here. If you want to export as a primary XML format, so if you want to give it to somebody who's using the web, you have to send an XML format. You select Next. You can select the project if you have multiple projects. An 8.3 XML format supports multiple projects. Click on Next. I'm going to put it into, if you select the layouts, then it goes as a zip file. I'm not going to export the layouts and it goes to an XML file. Here I can decide where I want to put it, so I'm going to put it on the desktop as OZB XML, save and finish, and that has now been exported in an XML format. And when it's finished, we can go to the desktop here and we can actually see it. It's down here as an XML format, and I can double click on it, and now I can open it up and you should be able to see the format. It just automatically opens up with whatever your default Windows browser is. Next, we'll export to Excel spreadsheet. So you select File, Export, you select Spreadsheet, Next, and it'll create up to 5 tabs, one with activity data, one with activity relationships, one with expenses data, the resources from your database, so it'll export all the resources, and the resource assignments against the activities. You select Next. If you've got multiple projects, you can decide what projects to export. You select Next. At this point, you have to create a map. So for example, I have a map with the templates, and if I go to modify here, you can see that we have a number of tables that we can decide. These tables here create the tables in Excel. So if I select activities, this is the data that's going to be exported. You're not able to export all the data to older versions of Excel because there are more fields in Primavera P6 than in older versions of Excel. So you need to decide what data you want to export, and it's not logical to export all the data if you don't want it all exported. So you decide what data you want to export. So if I want to export some durations, I can therefore go here and export my original duration or remaining durations or whatever else I would like to export at this point in time. Filter allows me to decide what activities I want to export, and sort allows me to decide what the sort order is. So you can create multiple templates for exporting the data that you wish to export. If I wish to import data, normally I would export, say, one activity with the data that I'd like to import so I can see the fields in Excel. We go to Next, and I can decide where I want to export it. So I'm going to export it to my desktop, select Next and Finish, and now it's exporting this data and it's exported to the desktop. This is the file that it's created, so if I double click on this to open it, this will open up this file. You'll find that it creates up to 5 tabs, so I have the 5 tabs here, plus it has the user data, so this is where it exports some user data here. Moving on, File, Export. The next file format is Project Planner, but I need to have P3 installed on my machine. In terms of Microsoft Project, you can see that I can export it in any of these formats here. So if I want to export as an XML format in 2010, I go Next, Next. I need to decide the mapping, and the interesting thing here is if I go to the mapping and I modify it, this mapping is used for importing and exporting, and you must work through this and be sure how you want to import or export projects. So first of all, there's a currency. You can select both products support multiple currencies. You can import Microsoft Project Summary Tasks. So on import Summary Tasks as WBS activities. It will create a WBS node for each summary activity, but also you can bring the tasks in as an additional WBS summary activity if you want. And if you want to, you can bring in the project baseline as budgeted values, and that's up to you. So if you want to bring in the project baseline, if you want to use one of the other 10 baselines, not the standard one, you can use one of the other baselines for the planned and budgeted values. On the activities, Microsoft Project allows resources to be signed against milestones. P6 doesn't, so you either need to bring in start milestones with the resources as expenses or bring in them as activities with 0 duration. Microsoft Project activity IDs can be brought in as the task ID, or you can bring them in from a user-defined text field if you've got a text field in Microsoft Project with some activity IDs. You need to decide what you want to do when you import Microsoft Project's fixed costs, whether you want to bring them in, and when you export, you can export the activity ID to Microsoft Project as a text field. So if you want this activity ID to go into a text field, you can do. In resources, choose whether the Microsoft Project field to import as a resource ID, you want the name or the initials, that's up to you. The initials is a bit dangerous because in Microsoft Project you can have the same initials multiple times. So you can have a project manager and a painter both with initials of P. So you need to be a bit careful here. Also, when you're importing resources from Microsoft Project, make sure a resource doesn't have a slash in the name, otherwise it won't bring it in from project. It'll actually, the import will fail. And also the other thing it will fail in import with Microsoft Project is a blank line. If a resource already exists, what do you want to do on import? Do you want to keep the resource updated or add a new resource? And again, you need to decide whether you want to corrupt your own database when you import, keeping the existing resource. I personally believe that you should have a standalone database that you use to import data against. If the resource doesn't exist, what you want to do about it, I would normally actually, when it says import under a resource, I would actually go and create a resource that I then import into. So for example, if I select OK and I'll go and cancel, I would go to the resource node here and I will create a node here, a special node to import my resources under. So I'm going to add another node here and I'm going to push it out and up and I'm going to call it MSP-1 and this is going to be the import. I must have -1 existing already, so this is -2 and I'm going to call this MSP import. And now I have a node that I can bring my new project in against. So we select File, Export. We're doing Microsoft Project. We're going to XML version 10. Select Next, Next. I've looked at my mapping, so Modify. We got to Resource here. So I can actually say when I import, I can import my resources under this node. I need to decide what I want to do with notebook topics, where I want to put them when I export them, and whether I want to export them or not. So again here, this is what we do with various notebook topics. Again, read the instructions, make sure you clearly understand what's happening. And custom fields, what you want to do with custom fields and where you want to put them. And again, it's quite a lot of work to set up proper mapping. But if you're not careful, when you export, there's no problems. But when you import a Microsoft Project file, you may corrupt your database if you're not careful. And I recommend that you have a standalone database that you import Microsoft Project files into. Once you're happy with your mapping and OK, you can select Next and then select Finish, and now it's exporting that project and you should be able to open this up in Microsoft Project. So this is now exported. So from Microsoft Project, I can select File, Open. I can go to the desktop. I should be able to find that XML file and select Open, and I should then be able to import that project into Microsoft Project, and you'll see that the calendars I've got assigned have been brought in as well. So that's how you export to Microsoft Project. The last format to export in, if I select File Export, is the UNCFACT XML format. I'll select Next, select the project, and obviously I can export it in the usual way. If I want to make it UNCFACT, I can now export that format and should be able to import it again. So I've deleted the Ausbuild project as if we're in another database, and I can select File, Import. I'm going to import an XCR file, import the project. I'm going to go to the desktop and I can select the XCR file from the desktop, select Next. I'm going to import it. You can decide where you want to import it to. I'm going to put it into Enterprise here, Next. And again, we go back to the configuration issue. You need to decide what's going to happen when you import the project and what's going to happen to activities, relationships, etc. This depends on whether you're updating an existing project or whether you're importing. At the moment, I'm importing, but you can use this to update as well. I'll say OK, Next, Finish, and this project will be imported. And you'll see now that for some unknown reason, it's taken me down the bottom here, but with a bit of luck, the project's up here. And if I go to the activities, you'll see the project's been imported. Also, if I go to project maintain baselines, you'll see there's no baseline. So this immediately tells me that when you import an XCR file, it doesn't, well, when you export, it doesn't export the baseline. It just exports the project on its own, and you have to actually export the baseline separately. But that's importing an XCR file. So I've deleted that project, so I can now go on to File, Import, and I now want to import an XML file. I select Next, and you'll see that I have two XML files. This is a Microsoft project, this is a P6. So if I select the Microsoft project one and go Next, it tells me it's not a valid file. I have to actually select a P6 XML format. I would select Next, and I can create a project if I want to, or if I have a project open, I can update it. And then we have a template, and again, you need to edit the template. This is new to Primavera version 6, 8.3, and there are a lot more options here than the earlier versions, and you need to decide what happens to existing data when you import a project. So moving on, I select Next and Finish, and it should now import that project and open it. So Primavera P6 8.3 has enhanced options for importing. This is the project, and you'll see now when I import it, it's brought the project in. But if I go to Project and I go Maintain Baselines, you'll see that the baseline doesn't come in. So I really should actually hide the baseline bars because it's not bringing a baseline project in. So here it's not bringing this project in. So that's therefore imported a project, and if I press F9, obviously it's going to recalculate. Next thing I wish to do is to import a spreadsheet. So I go File, Import. I need to have a project open to import it in, and because the project that I exported was called OZB, I've opened OZB. So I select Spreadsheet, I select Next, I select the file I want to import, which is on my desktop. I select Open, Next. I'm only going to bring in activities. It should delete some activities and it should add some activities. I'm going to update this project. So here I now need to select the project I want to update. I select Next and Finish. And then what it should do, as I said, it would delete some activities and add some activities. So with an Excel spreadsheet, if you want to bring it in, any calendars, activity codes, resources, all of that sort of thing, WBS notes must exist before you import. So it only enables you to bring in data against an existing project with existing attributes to import against. Moving on, I've deleted the file again so we can have a clean import. And the next thing we're going to import is a Microsoft XML file. We select Next and I can go select the file. And as I said, this was a project XML file. And so I'm going to create a new project, Next. And this is where I need to concentrate on the mapping, and I need to understand all of these options, what happens to milestones, what happens to the activity IDs, the resources, the notebook, custom fields. You need to read up on the options here. Also, when you bring in a project from Microsoft Project, the two products calculate differently. There is an article on my website under technical articles that explains the differences between the way Microsoft Project P6 calculates. And therefore, if you bring in anything but a simple project, if it's got progress and that sort of thing, they will not calculate the same. Don't expect them to. There's often a lot of work to make sure they calculate the same. I'll select OK, I'll select Next, and then Finish. And now it should import that project, and then I should be able to open it up and see it. So now it's imported the project. If you have some issues, look at the log file to tell you what's happening. I select Close, and you'll see here now that the project's been imported, and it's created the WBS nodes from the summary activities, and the activity IDs have come in as activity IDs in P6. But again, that's up to you how you want your activity IDs to be numbered with the options. So again, bringing in Microsoft Project files, there's some interesting issues in terms of exporting and importing from Microsoft Project. I'd like to take you to my website, primavera.com.au, and show you a couple of things here. First of all, under technical papers, you'll find an article down here talking about the differences between the way P6 and Microsoft Project calculates. Here I've got importing Microsoft Project 2003 to 2010 into Oracle P6 version 7. But you'll find that version 8 and 2013 isn't very much different. Also, you'll find under third-party software, there are a lot of tools that enable you to clean up a XCR file when you bring it in. So Xena Configuration Utility is one of the products that will do that. XCR Manager will do that as well. So there's some tools here that you might want to look at buying so you can clean up an XCR file before you bring it in. So that covers most of the issues with importing and exporting files into a database. And I strongly recommend that you have a sacrificial database to import and export your data into so you don't corrupt your master database.